This is Jim Mulhern, the Plymouth Jim on socials, and I thank you. The show's an escape from work and business and politics. We talk humor and music. We talk to artists, writers, creatives, broadcasters, talented people who impact us. We get a few things out of the way first, talk with our great guest. We play thank you, no thank you. And at the end, we handle the necessary disclaimers, and then we end the frivolity. So on today's show, newspaper man Neal Rubin. Neal, you'll get a proper intro after I get something out of the way, and then a plug for this coffee clatch. Are we good?
I'm Boffo.
All right, you're Boffo. Excellent. We're recording this show on the eve of the annual NFL championship football game. So let me get this out of the way. Howard Cosell would have hated and loved the broadcast business of pro football today. The Stephen A. Smith of his day, Cosell was most famous for being on Monday Night Football with Frank Gifford and Dandy Don Meredith. He was the sports writer and the heel of the broadcast. He sat between the smooth broadcaster Gifford and the freewheeling ex-jock in Don Meredith. It was appointment TV on Monday nights when there was only one game on. Long dead and somewhat missed, Cosell ranted about many things. High on that list was what he called the jockocracy, meaning the increased hiring of ex-players to do commentary on sports broadcasts. He saw them mostly as dumb, afraid to criticize other players, and mediocre at their craft. Howard's premonition has come to full fruition. The jock fest of broadcasts have steadily devolved into 3 hours of painful cheerleading sandwiched in between insurance commercials. And these broadcasters, in air quotes, are a loud and lazy lot. You get a lot of wow, whoa, and other bluster. And on the occasion you get any information that you'd want, like down and distance or who made the tackle, it's like a breath of fresh air. But this rant is about one thing in particular. These hacks are beating one word in our English language to an unmerciful death. And that word is unbelievable. Every broadcast, every highlight show, every radio show, you will get your brains and ears beaten in that every excellent player, coach, team effort is unbelievable. Unbelievable, unbelievable, unbelievable. Guess what, dummies? It's not. It's all believable. It's eminently believable. It happens at every NFL stadium by elite athletes every week of the season. What's unbelievable is the low watt quality and unoriginality of these announcers. Every one of them should get a thesaurus when they sign a contract with these lazy networks. Howard Cosell would be both intolerable and inconsolable were he alive today. He would be reminding us in his incredibly snide and annoying way how mediocre these jocks are at both the language and these broadcasts. And he would be right. That, my friends, is believable. So I had to get that out of the way. But moving on, first, as always, we have to do a plug. And it reads thusly. And I Thank You show is brought to you this week by who else but Dynamic Mattresses. Well, who here regularly gets a good night's sleep? If you're like most, you've seen enough mattress advertisements to make you go horizontal. Well, it's time for some pillow talk, people. And it's not from that pillow guy who should be institutionalized. No, today we're talking mattresses, and today from our friends at Dynamic Mattresses. Yes, Dynamic Mattresses, located in friendly West Ypsilanti, is turning the sleep community on its ear and onto its back. As owner Herb Sheets says, we're going to wake you up and put you to sleep. There are so many mattresses. Should you get a Serta, a Tempur-Pedic, a Sattva, a Purple mattress, a Sleep Number? What about Stearns and Foster? Maybe as your accounting firm, but in the mattress world, Dynamic is raising the stakes and lowering the headboard. As a society, we're now in the era of wellness. And what could make you more well than a fantastic night's sleep? Dynamic believes in nature, and to prove it, Dynamic has taken the natural goodness of plant-based fillings into mattress technology. Yes, Dynamic mattresses combine both the softness of hemp covers and the relaxing comfort of 100% indica cannabis filling to bring you a sleep that can only be described as drugged. Eliminating the middleman of clumsy pens and gummies, Dynamic promises that you'll literally lay down your head, Tom Dooley. Yes, Mr. Sandman couldn't bring you a dream any faster than your new Dynamic mattress. Available in full, queen, king, and pre-roll, Dynamic has you covered. You'll love your solid sleep and you'll wake up rested and possibly hungry. And not only that, as a bonus, when the mattress reaches its normal lifespan, you'll invite your friends over to burn it in effigy, in a relaxed tribute to the gods of sleep and possibly also to the mothers of invention. Dynamic mattresses can be found at select pop-up stores adjacent to Dead and Company tour stops and direct at sleepdispensary.com. Dynamic mattresses should not be used as a rolling vehicle. Smoking in bed is never a good idea, and in this case is redundant. Proof of 21 years old is required to purchase Dynamic mattresses, and side effects may include drowsiness, increased drowsiness, and increased appetite. Pets may or may not perform well after their Dynamic rest, and Dynamic is not responsible for pet surprises of the urinary tract variety. And finally, Dynamic Mattresses is a proud division of Dynamic Industries. Say what you will, it's Dynamic. And I thank you. Now, on to the show. My God. Thank you for sitting through that, Neal Rubin. Neal Rubin, my guest today, is of the Detroit Free Press. And Neal is a reporter. Neal is a journalist. Neal is a longtime great feature writer in our fine state of Michigan. Detroiters and Michiganders know Neal's byline promises a read that is unlike any other. And a great writer takes you around and takes you inside of the subject. And Neal does this all the time with wit and with soul. It's my pleasure to welcome you to And I Thank You, Neal Rubin. Welcome.
Why, thank you. It's good to be here. I should point out that technically I'm a columnist, which allows me to get away with a lot of things and helps imbue what I write, I think, with flair and point of view. Um, and in case this should come up, I don't know, in my obit or something, in high school, I would sometimes do public address announcements
Yes.
in the voice of Howard Cosell.
Oh, it's so funny. You know, as we mature, there are there are so many people who don't know who he is. The a whole younger generation who doesn't. So that's awesome. Love
Yeah,
that.
it's one of those impressions that has not worn well. I could do the world's best Howard Cosell, and about 75% of the population of the US would say, huh?
I think it's that, and I think it was the I don't know. I think it might have been the ignominious way that he exited the sports journalism business, you know, when he made an inappropriate comment. And I think a lot of people remember that. And but boy, he was a force of nature back in the day. In
He
a
was
different time.
when there were surveys, he was frequently voted the least liked sportscaster in America, but in the same surveys, he would also be voted best liked.
Isn't that
You can't
interesting?
ask for more than that if you're a broadcaster.
Well, now that you say that, I remember, I think it was his tagline that he used to say. I didn't he used to say, I tell it like it is? Or was that,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. It's you, I mentioned him and Stephen A. Smith in the same breath because I think they're Stephen A. Smith is would probably tell you that he's cut from the same cloth, I think, or tries to be that that informed provocateur,
Mhm.
in the sports world. But well, can you do your imitation?
It's been so long that I'm afraid I wouldn't do it justice. 'Cause I mean, I haven't trotted it out in probably 40 years.
I won't
Uh,
put you on the spot. I
well, let me
won't.
see if it comes to me at some point and I'll just lapse into it here in the
Yes,
middle of the podcast unexpectedly.
perfect, perfect. So if Neil, if I'm to believe your wiki, you started in California, you matriculated to Northern Colorado before we got to begin to read you in Michigan. Um, where in California? Talk a bit about where you came from.
Sure, I grew up in Southern California, Orange County, back when there were actually orange groves in Orange
Hmm,
County. We had an orange grove over our back fence. And we moved to Colorado when I was a junior in high school. You can imagine how pleased I was about that move and how pleasant I was to be with in the car all the way to suburban Denver.
I'm
I
sure.
was not a fan. It turned out to be a great move.
Right.
Did finished high school, went to college in Colorado, and I was fortunate. You know, a lot of college grads, it's sort of this almost universal, this panic mode where it's, oh my God, I'm about to graduate or I just graduated. Now what the heck am I going to do? Where am I
Yeah.
going to find my first job? I already had that. I was a sports writer when I got into newspapers, and I got my first full-time sports writing job my last year of college
Okay.
at a very good daily in Greeley, Colorado, where I went to the University of Northern Colorado. I've been unbelievably lucky. Um, I think the only job I ever applied for was the Detroit Free Press when I came from Las Vegas, and otherwise, I just keep stumbling into things or people keep reaching out to me. It's pretty obnoxious, so I don't mention it very often because, you know,
Yeah, I think I hear you, but I think also, your talent has something to do with that, right? It's that notion of, that you've been fortunate, but you've also been very good at what you do, and it's amazing where life takes you, right? Took you to Detroit.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And
Of
I
all
was a
places.
geography minor, so I could have found Detroit on a map, but it never occurred to me that I would wind up, you know, building a life in Detroit, calling it absolutely home. I always thought of myself as migrant labor. I went from Colorado to Las Vegas and then okay on to Detroit, and you just kind of follow the jobs. But I liked it here from day one. And, I've had a couple of interviews other places over the years and turned them down. I like it here.
Well, and for somebody, and I don't know back in the day, but for somebody who is in journalism or media, Detroit's a major market, and people think what they think about it, but I'm just curious when the opportunity opened up, what was your if you can remember back, what was your thinking about moving to Detroit?
Well, um, there was a bit of geographic ignorance involved.
Okay.
Again, I'm, working in Las Vegas. I had been a sports writer for 4.5 years, and then I moved to the other Las Vegas paper as a feature writer. My best friend lives in Chicago. and he
Okay.
got married. So I was in Chicago for a week. And, again, I was not a total hayseed. I had seen tall buildings before, but Chicago, the bustle, the restaurants, the architecture, all of it,
Everything.
and two Major League Baseball teams. So I was in Chicago for a week and absolutely fell in love with it. Got back to Las Vegas, immediately fired off, a resume and some clips to the two Chicago papers. Then I thought, Chicago, Detroit, large Midwestern cities, they got to be pretty much alike. So I applied to the Free Press and the News. I got an absolute go away, don't bother us, who do you think you are from the News.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
and yeah, but got an encouraging response from the Free Press that I followed up a few months later. And 40 short years later, here we are with, of course, a 22-year interlude in the middle at the Detroit News, which once told me to get lost. So
Right. Oh man. So when you came, were you hired in as a sports writer or a general reporter, or what was that like?
I was a feature writer, and I
Okay.
was hired into what was then the Way We Live section of the
Okay.
Free Press, which
Yep.
was this big, robust section full of interesting people doing interesting things. It was huge fun, great place to be. And I was 28. I was just shy of 29 when I got here. And I
What year
was
would that have
the
been?
1984.
84. Okay, got it.
Yeah, August of 84. Good timing for someone who likes baseball.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yes. And I was the only unmarried male in a department mostly full of married women who all took a deep vested interest in my social life.
Oh, that's
So
great.
that was interesting. At the time, there were personal ads in the paper. Now, of course, that stuff's all online, but there were personal ads in the paper. There was even a glossy publication. I don't remember the name of it, Sincere Singles or something like this. And women in the department would circle what they thought were likely prospects and leave them on my desk.
Wow.
I
That's awesome.
appreciated the thought. Yes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I um I delivered the Free Press as a kid, and it, I remember the Way We Live. I remember, you would fold the papers, right, and put them in your
Right.
bag and put them, sling it onto your bike, and then you'd go. And gosh, those were great days. Now I was a little bit older in the 84. I would be graduating high school back then. But for people who don't know, who aren't Detroiters, 84 was the year the Tigers had an incredible, what did they start? 35-4 or something like that? 35 and
35-5, I believe, but
35
who's
and 5,
counting?
yes. And went on their way to win the World Series with the incredible team. So, oh yeah, that was quite a year in Detroit for sports. Um, and but you were doing the Way We Live. So
I was,
who
but
were
it,
some
it was
who were some of the contemporary columnists, the Bob Talberts, or who were the big heavy hitters of that day in the Freep?
well, Bob Talbert was on the back page
Okay.
of the paper. You'd read the front page, and you had all 5 or 6 sections of the paper in your hand. You'd read the front page, and then
Yep.
you'd flip the whole thing over, and on the back page was Bob Talbert and Names and Faces, and Jim Fitzgerald
Yep.
was he was a classic. He was an absolute riot, and this is a trifle off point, but we'll get back to the other columnists. Jim Fitzgerald and his wife used to play sort of full contact Wheel of Fortune. They would watch Wheel of Fortune together every night, and it was very competitive. Well, one day in the, I don't know, it was probably the late '80s. I was in uh, I was in Battle Creek, I think, on a story, and checked into a hotel. And there at the time, well, in Detroit, it was Jeopardy at 7, Wheel
Yeah,
of Fortune at 7:30,
absolutely.
which is now reversed. But in Battle Creek, it was Wheel of Fortune first and then Jeopardy. Well, I realized what a bonanza this was. I watched Wheel of Fortune, wrote down all the answers, all the puzzles, and then called Jim Fitzgerald at like 7:28 and gave him the entire rundown of what he and his wife were about to see on TV. I don't
Oh,
think he ever told her.
that is
I think
brutal. Oh, did their marriage survive?
it seemed to have,
Oh, good,
yes.
good, good.
Yes, and Jim was an interesting guy. He was a really entertaining columnist. He was funny in print, which not many of us can do. I mean, it's one thing to be funny in your living room,
Right.
which is different from being funny on stage at a comedy club, but both of those things are different from being funny in print. And I think one of the reasons I've fallen into jobs over the years is I can be pretty funny in print,
Yes.
or at least funnier than people expect. And sometimes that's all you need. Um, but anyway, Jim was terrific, and then he retired and went home to Lapeer. And every now and again, the paper would call him and say, "I remember when George Romney died," or when something like that happened, and they'd call him up and say, "Hey, Jim, you knew George Romney. Do you want to write about it?" And he'd say, "No, I don't do that anymore."
That's
Not
funny.
everybody can, yeah, not everyone can cut the cord, but once Jim was out, he was out. Nikki McWhorter was the Way We Live columnist
Yes, I
back
remember
then.
her. Yep.
And I think Nikki had had a heyday where she was, valuable and trend-setting and a woman's voice in the lifestyle section, tackling some issues. By the time I got there, at least to me, she was kind of phoning it in.
Mm,
Um, you know, but anyway, I I don't need to trash somebody who hasn't been in print for 30 years. I should just
right?
move on. But anyway, she had been great and was still very popular. And she figured out that if every now and again, you could write about what you saw at your living room window, and then every now and again you write something about, all fishermen are idiots or everyone who owns an RV is a bum, and you get lots of mail. And management would say, "Boy, that Nikki, they might not always agree with her, but they sure react." Well, it kept her going for a few extra years.
Isn't that
Um,
interesting? She pushed
yeah,
buttons.
yes, but I think she knew what she was doing pre-internet,
Oh,
basically. But it was a very internet sort of tactic. Um, Mike Downey was our lead sports columnist.
oh, terrific.
Yes, he was just great. And Um, sadly, I went to his memorial service a few months ago. Um,
Yeah. We've
but
lost a couple good mics of late, who were legendary, Freep writers. Mike Duffy. Um,
yes,
my gosh. The, um, I think both of those guys, Downey was different. Um, he he had a he was funny, but he also was a also could be a tough critic. Um, and um I was sad to see Mike. I was sad to see his passing, and I was sad to see Mike Duffy's passing. And I thought,
yes,
gosh, those guys were they were appointment reading. I think in the day because I think they to your point about being able to be engaging in how you write, whether that's being funny or whether it's being pointed or whether it's being opinionated or whatever it is. Um, boy, you miss that now, I think. And I'm not trying to be, nostalgic for the old days, but you can I think I can count on one hand, who I would consider appointment reading these days in print. Um, I don't
yeah.
know.
And, Mike Duffy, well, Mike Downey basically set the stage for Mitch Albom. Mike
Yes.
was the first sports columnist in Detroit anyway, who was read by people who didn't know whether a football was pumped or stuffed. You didn't have to know or care about sports to enjoy Mike Downey's writing.
Mm,
And because Mike had established that template,
yeah,
the Free Press went out and found Mitch, which was a spectacular hire. He was like the number 3 columnist in Fort Lauderdale,
right.
but again, he touches people. He can be pointed, he can be eloquent, and people relate to him, and people who aren't sports fans will eagerly read him, which is a huge benefit for the paper. Mike Duffy, it was interesting because, part of his persona was to be this goofball in print, shout Ramalama, whatever the
Captain Video.
catchphrases were. Yeah, the whole Captain Video thing. And it was hugely entertaining, but he was also a really smart, prescient TV reviewer. Um, there were a couple of shows. He was early in on The Sopranos. He said,
Mm,
"Hey, everybody, check this out. This is going to reinvent television as we know it." Uh, Married with Children. He was in early on that and just said, "Hey, if you're not watching this, you're doing the wrong thing at that time of night."
right.
So,
I think we could have a long conversation about criticism. We go into Marshall McLuhan, but but I think what was so what was so respectable about a guy like Duffy, just what you said, Neal, which is um, he was a guy who was such an adroit writer, and when you would run into a drama or a comedy that had like Sopranos that had spectacular writing, um, you know of what you critique or speak, right? Um, and you could smell a turd too, right? And Duffy was so good about that too. I mean, it was just like, and anyway, it's like pornography, right? You know it when you see it. But he always spotted the shows that had brilliant writing. I think he Hill Street Blues, things like that, that were
yes.
just, that were genius TV writing at the time. And it was great to get led to those things in the day, by somebody who knew what they were doing and knew what they were writing about. It was fun. Um, gosh, um, yeah. One other thing, you were speaking about how Downey came in and laid that template for a Mitch album to come in, and I think Mitch has very much become less of a sports writer. And I think part of it is, as you get older too, I think your interests change, and I think your focus probably gets wider. He's lived a lot of life and he's written a lot of books and he's done a lot of things. But um, I was, I think I thought of Downey as more of a sports writer than I think of Mitch as a sports writer. Maybe that's just me. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's legit, especially since in Detroit, that's all Mike was. Like you said, Mitch has been other things, and his biggest presence now is a Sunday column
Mm-hmm.
that's not sports.
Right.
Um, Mike moved on from here to the LA. Mike Downey moved on to the LA Times, where he wrote sports for a while, and then wrote a Cityside column. And so in LA, they knew him as more than a sports writer. And then he retired young. And then the Chicago Tribune had been trying to hire him for decades, and they finally threw enough money at him and made it sound like enough fun that he went back and wrote sports again for the Chicago Tribune in
Right.
his Mike Downey way, where he's more interested in people than in box scores, and uh, and then retired again. Um, this is this is somewhat off point, but I love telling this story.
Yeah,
Uh, and hey, we've got a lot of time here.
I love it.
Um,
Yeah, no, let's go. We can go anywhere we
okay,
want.
all right. So, um, Mike was a good friend, and one year when he was in LA, Maui became his happy place. He'd go
Mm.
3 or 4 times a year. And relatively quick hop, certainly quicker than it is from Detroit. But one year, my wife and I overlapped our vacations with Mike on Maui, and of course, um, my wife takes it as a personal affront if any male she likes is not married or a personal challenge. So, she wasn't in position to try to fix Mike up, but there were discussions about his social life and his single status. Well,
Discussions.
probably, yeah, it's probably 6 months later, I get a voicemail at work, and it's Mike telling me, "Hey, just wanted to let you know I'm engaged." Well, super. But I go home and tell Marcy, my wife, and
Right.
her immediate response is, "I don't like this. 6 months ago, he wasn't seeing anybody at all, and now he's engaged. I don't trust this woman. I don't like this woman. Mind you, we don't know her name. I don't, you know, I don't trust this woman. I don't like this woman. She's a gold digger. All she wants is his money and his name."
Oh boy.
Okay. Well, a week or so later, another phone call. He's now married, and he writes a column about it that was absolutely one of the best columns I've ever read by anybody. It turns out that Mike's wife, to whom he remained blissfully married for the rest of his life, was one of Dean Martin's daughters.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so in a sense, and she used to sing backup for her dad. She played some lounges on her own in Las Vegas and places like that.
Yep.
But she also sang backup for her dad, Dean. And you might remember Dean was always Dean Martin and the Gold Diggers. That was the name for his backup group. So
That's right.
in it,
I'd forgotten
yes,
about that.
inadvertently, my wife was right.
Oh
Gail
my
was
God.
in fact a gold digger.
She, I would say your wife was prescient.
Yes,
Oh my
yes.
gosh, that is hilarious. Wow. Well, so oh my gosh, so many questions. We won't go down the Dean Martin rabbit hole. That'll take us places where we don't necessarily want to go. But it might be fun. Um, I want to ask you about Gil Thorpe.
Sure.
So for my peeps who are listening who don't know the story, Neal, you wrote the you so Gil Thorpe was a comic strip when there were comic strips in the newspapers. Gil Thorpe was about a high school coach, correct me if I'm wrong, Neal, um,
Hmm.
at a high school. And it was Gil Thorpe was really about it was really a um I wouldn't would you characterize Gil Thorpe as a because they used to call it the funnies, right? We wouldn't call it the funnies, but it was more of a serial, and it was really about a day in the life, a week in the life about this coach and Coach Gil Thorpe. Am I right?
Yes, in fact, in the industry, that's what they call it. It's a serial strip.
Okay,
It's
got it.
still alive. Um, and Gil was the all-season coach and athletic director at Milford High School.
That's right.
Not our Milford, as it turns out. We never let on where Milford was, but it was actually based on New Milford, Connecticut. Um,
Gotcha.
and, it was a lot of social issues, problems the kids might be having that Gil might have a hand in solving. But of course, there's a competitive aspect of it as you go on because every year was divided into football season, basketball season, spring sports, baseball usually, and
Yeah.
then you kind of fake your way through the summer. And as a writer, and one of the things I brought to it was, they had they asked a bunch of people to apply to write Gilthorpe when the opening came up. Oh, heck, I'll give you a little bit of background. Gilthorpe was launched in 1958 by a guy named Jack Barrell, he wrote it and drew it
Okay.
from 1958 almost until he died in 1996. Later in his life, as he was sick, he had to have help drawing it. But among comic strip artists, he's spoken in the same reverent tones as, like Hal Miller, the guy who did Prince Valiant.
Right.
Only Jack did it 6 days a week without color on Sunday. Just, a wonderful artist. Anyway, Jack died in 96, and the Syndicate, all comic strips, Dear Abby, crossword puzzles, all of those are distributed nationwide by what are known as content syndicates,
Yep.
because it's not like you can go knock on the door of every newspaper saying, "Hey, do you want to buy my Sudoku puzzle?" That's what the syndicate does,
Right.
and then the syndicate takes a big cut of the money that comes in, and everybody's happy. Um, anyway, the syndicate had to go find a new writer, and they found a guy named Jerry Jenkins who'd written a couple of youth sports novels, and he was the kind of guy who did, those as told to biographies with
Mm.
sports stars,
Yep.
where, the sports star just answers questions into a tape recorder for a week or so, and then somebody turns it into a book. Well, so they hired Jerry Jenkins, and then uh, Jerry, are you familiar with the Left Behind series of uh, evangelical novels? Basically, it's the good people who are left behind or after the apocalypse, or maybe it's the people who are stuck on Earth after all the good people go to heaven.
Only vaguely.
Yeah, well, it becomes a massive hit in the evangelical world. And, basically FedEx is delivering money to Jerry's house in big cartons. And so he really didn't need a moderately successful comic strip. He fobbed it off on his kids who couldn't write a lick. So
Okay.
when his contract came due, they went looking for a new writer, and that's how I wound up with Gil Thorpe, and did it for 18 years. I said, lots of fun. You're kind of creating your own little world. You know,
Right.
the outline of the world is there because you've got Gil Thorpe, you've got the high school. The cast of kids changes all the time. Gil never much aged, but kids would age out of high school, and you'd get replacement kids, and and the most fun was that I could name characters after my friends,
Oh, that's
or
cool.
put it up for charity auction, which was an idea I got from Elmore Leonard. Donate. If you're the high bidder, I'll name a character after whoever you want me to name a character after. And then, of course, you could do the opposite. There was a coach I particularly disliked in high school, and when I needed a corrupt AAU basketball coach paying kids under the table and generally being a sleazeball, I named him Larry Nelson.
Wow.
Take that, Larry.
That's awesome. What do they call that when there's a term the kids use now? It's like where there's a little hidden nugget, and it's at the tip of my tongue, and I can't remember what it was,
Easter
but
egg?
Easter egg. Thank you. That's what it is. You planted Easter eggs.
Yes.
I remember that. That's such a cool thing that whole thing. When you were talking about your predecessor and or these previous people who wrote these comics, and then it was time to pass it on. I have a friend who talks a lot about the comics and laments about what happened to the family circus because the guy who wrote that evidently handed it off to his son who can't write a lick, and it's just reliably awful. And I you think you think about what the Family Circus is. It was one cartoon. It wasn't like a strip of, a storyboard of, six or eight things that are happening that made up what the strip was for that week. It was one picture of one of the kids saying something pithy or funny. And you'd have to be really good to make that reliably good a lot. Like really, you're writing one or two lines, rather than a serial. And it was meant to be funny. But evidently the kid of the Family Circus, Bill somebody, um, is mailing it in. So anyway, I digress.
Yes, those are known as single panel, I think,
Thank
strips.
you.
And um, the beauty of Family Circus when we were kids, and I was a kid before you were a kid, but still, it was the original Family Circus.
Yeah.
It was a starter strip. It was
Ah,
one that, the newspaper came to your house and your parents read the newspaper and you might gravitate to the comic section.
brilliant.
And
Yes.
that was a strip
Yep.
that would rope kids in. They
Yep.
identified with it. It wasn't so sophisticated that they didn't get it. And the hope, I think, was that you start them out reading the comics, and before too long, you snared them, and they're reading the whole paper.
Neal, I think you're saying that it's a gateway drug.
Yes, exactly.
Oh
That and
man.
sports sections.
So when did you stop writing Gilthorpe?
2022. Yeah, I think I did it from 2004 to 2022. Um, Part of it was that the news had hired me away from the Free Press in 2000. The Free Press lured me back
Mm-hmm.
in 2022, and I wanted to devote, all my attention work-wise
Yes.
to this column. Also, after 18 years, I was running out of ideas.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Naturally.
had done some social issues, had done some funny stuff, but I was just really scraping for what the heck am I going to do with this cast of characters? And
Yeah.
it was just time to wander away and hand it off to someone else.
Well, I see that. And so that handoff benefited all the readers of the Freep as you went off to the Freep and started doing some really so many your column, your Sunday column, and I'm still a dinosaur who gets the printed, Sunday paper. So, I go right to section A and read your column and read Mike Elrick's column. And it's just great. And you never know what you're gonna get, but it always sucks you in. It's often really, really funny. You're the one that you're doing on the Sheets company trying to put in put in these convenience stores. It was great because it gave us the who, what, why, and where, and all of that, but it was so funny in certain parts. I was loving that. So kudos to you.
Why, thank you. And now um, readers have decided, and I'm grateful for this. I want readers to think of me as someone they can reach out to, someone they can commiserate with, and a lot of great ideas come from readers. But I've now become, in their mind, the Sheets correspondent.
Oh,
I've heard
that's
from,
great.
like Sheets is trying to build now in Royal Oak, at 14 Mile and Coolidge,
Oh
for
boy,
anybody who's familiar with that area.
I am.
And Royal Oak Ganders are not pleased about this, at least the ones who've contacted me are not. And so, apparently I'm going to be the clearinghouse for
Wow.
Sheets objections. And what's interesting is that the one they proposed in Farmington Hills is, a mile from my house. And part of me likes the convenience of having 24-hour gasoline and hot sandwiches,
Sure.
you know, it, you know, if I'm hungry at 2 a.m., I like knowing there's somebody there who's going to feed me. But at the same time, I understand the objections of people who are perhaps not quite as self-serving as me, and
Yeah.
recognize the traffic, the noise, the lights, just the general congestion to neighbors who never signed up to live next to a massive 24-hour convenience store, restaurant, and gas station.
Yeah, I think yeah, that's an interesting one. So would it be appropriate to say in Royal Low that the sheets has hit the fan?
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
and Sheets loves that sort of pun, by the way.
Do they
I
really?
don't think they won't quite use that one, but yes,
Oh my
yes,
God.
they would applaud.
Well, I think the idea of 24-hour hot sandwiches is uh better than the reality of 24-hour hot sandwiches, but that's an editorial comment on my part. Hey, Neal, I want to play our little game that we do in this show called Thank You or No Thank You. And I just throw random things at you. And you don't even have you can pass or you can comment. You can say thank you or no thank you and move right on. And I and this is just these are just random because there's so much we could talk about. But this is where we can have some fun and shoot the proverbial sheets here. So all right. So I'm going to start with your permission. Thank you or no thank you, Mort Krim.
Oh, thank you. A terrific guy, voice of God, and had a sense
Yes.
of humor about it. Um, he is still active on social media, retired in Florida in his late 80s, and it wasn't until a year or two ago that he gave up his pilot's license.
Oh wow.
Yeah, he used to fly to Marshall and have somebody pick him up at the airport so he could have lunch at Win Schuler's.
Oh my gosh. That's awesome. Well, that's good for him and good for society that he turned in that license um and that he's healthy and happy. He is the voice of God, and that guy can sell a window too, we know from living in Detroit. um thank you or no thank you, Scott Adams.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Um, to me, he no thank you to his way out.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's
Did you
funny
know him?
because no,
Okay.
no, I did not know him. Enjoyed Dilbert, but he just sort of self-immolated
Boy.
and
Yeah.
kind of was antagonistic on purpose to the people who employed him, and they said we can do without you.
Yeah.
I think the comic strip still exists. I'm sure there are some papers that are still carrying it, but he really torpedoed an extremely prosperous career.
Boy, did he ever. Okay. Thank you, no thank you, Louis Pizza.
This is embarrassing. I'm a fan of Buddies. I'm a
Yes.
fan of some of the other, uh, the other pizza restaurants that have grown from the Buddies tree, including Cloverleaf in
Yep.
East Point, which is
Mhm.
just wonderful.
Yep.
I've never been to Louis.
You should go and you won't be surprised about any of it. Um, but it's terrific. And you know, you it is very much from that tree of buddies as Louis and Gus, I guess, toiled in that Buddy's Pizza Kitchen low
Hmm.
back in the day. And he was a character, and I won't go into it, but I knew Louis a little bit before he passed. And um, what a great it's a great place. You need to go there at least once. It's just to take it in Hazel Park.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Heck, let's
Okay.
both go. Let's go together.
All right, let's go. It's a date. Thank you, no thank you, Iggy Pop.
Thank you. Thank you for Iggy Pop. I was not here for the heyday of Iggy and the Stooges, but I think he's clearly an important figure in rock and roll. He's somebody we can claim, and he was just a scrawny drummer who became Iggy Pop, and there's a lot to be said for that.
And without going too deep, he's one of these guys too because of what he looked like and because of the Stooges sound. And so fast forward to the last 20 years where he lives in France, and he's just a scholar on art and music, and he's this incredibly well-read punk. He's just he's an artist, and yeah, so an interesting chap. I wasn't sure where you came down on him. I'm glad you said thank you, Iggy. um Thank you, no thank you. I got a whole list here.
Oh, please do. This is huge fun. So,
Excellent. All right. Well, let's go. Thank you. No, thank you. Tony Romo.
um, he's getting into the no thank you realm. Some may notice my house phone is ringing. I'm trying to hang it up. That's always good for a for a
Maybe
podcast.
somebody's selling you
Phone ringing
windows.
phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mort, how you been? Um, I think, early on, Tony Romo was kind of a revelation. He was a pretty good broadcaster for a former quarterback, and he had a knack for actually, predicting what was going to happen on the next play or the next series and having it come true. But the last few times I've listened to a broadcast he's on and really paid attention, uh, there's some windbagging going on there. So the potential is there for Tony Romo to become the good side of Tony Romo again, but I think quality control needs to get involved. How about you? How do you sit on Tony Romo?
I am 100, as the kids say these days, 100%. I'm in complete agreement with you. Um, he was a revelation because he would call the plays before they would happen, or he would tell you
Mhm.
what they were doing. And now it's execrable. Sorry, it's I have to mute the TV, and he's not alone in that. Gosh, I want to hear. I want to learn something from the broadcast, and I don't
Mhm.
learn anything from him. And it's a lot of platitudes, and it's a lot of things. And I think we're all guilty because we're not guilty, but we live in a time where information is so accessible. So I think it's hard for these color guys too to be really original and authentic and tell you something that you don't know. But boy, he's got so much institutional knowledge of playing football, and I didn't play football, much less quarterback. So I want to learn more, and I want to hear less cliches. That's my take.
That's
Anyway,
a great take.
yeah. Um, Thank you, no thank you. Bates Burgers.
I'm uh, I'm a thank you on sliders in general.
Okay.
Um, I did not grow up with them. We didn't have uh, Bates or any of the slider chains
Yeah,
or
White Castle.
individual slider. White Castle, I couldn't come up with the name there,
Yep.
but I went to college with at Northern Colorado, which is sort of a cross between EMU and CMU. It's prettier than CMU, but more broad based than than EMU. Basically, Northern Colorado and EMU both started out as teachers' colleges and
Yeah.
grew up.
Yeah.
They were normal schools, in fact. That was the term back then. Well,
Normal schools. Yeah.
we have, for among out of states, boy, this is a long, windaggy answer to a simple question, but um, out of state students, we had the most out of state students from California, the second most from Illinois.
Mm,
And all these Illinois kids could not stop talking about White Castles.
interesting.
Yeah, and then so I was fired up for White Castles when I moved to Michigan, and holy smokes, there were White Castles.
Right.
And finally went for the first time with a date. We had been to the theater, I think the Fisher or something like that, seeing a touring play, and then went to White Castle, dressed appropriately, I thought, you know. But anyway, so yes, I was immediately a fan, and it's the Bateses, the Greens, the Tellway, the Dooleys, you know,
Yep.
the smaller, more independent slider places that I really love.
You just reminded me of the sad demise of Miller's in Dearborn. Um, I shouldn't say that because I haven't been there since they changed hands, but the original. Did you ever go to Miller's in Dearborn?
Oh, I did.
Yeah.
One of my favorite Detroit burgers.
Yeah, and I think from what I've heard, well, I know they sold it, but the reviews were not good. But I need to go. I need to not slag them, and I need to go in there and do a proper review. That could be another place we could meet up. But I've heard it's not as good, and that place was legendary. Um, all right. We've talked about some of these thank yous that just came out in our discussion already. So I'm scrolling. Thank you, no thank you. Sports Talk Radio.
Um, well, thank you because my radio has a dial and I can switch away. I think,
Yeah.
you know, good sports talk radio can be very good. A lot of it feels kind of repetitive,
Hmm.
and I think it has created um, an atmosphere or an ethos where everybody, no matter what the subject, no matter what they're doing, everybody acts like they're calling into sports talk radio.
Hmm.
Um, so, to some extent, I think it wears out its welcome. On the other hand, some people do it really well. Bob Winowski, Wojo from the news,
Mhm.
has been a host well, he started on WDFN and now he's on the ticket. He's terrific at it. He's very funny. He's low key. He makes it clear that he realizes sports are important, but they're not the most important thing in the world. And he just has fun with it. So, you know, Wojo's huge fun. A lot of people are way too serious about this.
I agree. And full transparency, he's a friend. So that
Good.
he does a good job. And, and this is another subject for another day, but I think gambling has changed the landscape so much. And fantasy sports too. I think it's really altered the perspective of many of what we would many fans, right? They're
Mhm.
when there's money on the line, it changes everything. And so I think that's one thing I don't love about the current sports landscape. But boy, it's a great time to be a Detroiter, for sports right now. I mean, the teams are all good or getting good, and so it's a good time. Good time. I'd like to hear more on the sports talk radio from the guys who are on the beat. I like to hear more from the Sean Windsors and the John
Mhm.
Neos and the I think the columnists who I think are are adroit at this kind of thing and are in the middle of it and have some experience and can share some expertise with us.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of both those guys you just mentioned. They're both terrific writers, good thinkers, great guys. Sean Windsor, John Neo.
Yep.
You know, it's a very good age. Jeff Seidel at the Free Press. It's a very good age to be a sports fan in Detroit. There are, good people in your paper, good teams on the field and on the court, on the ice now. You know, things are looking up. Would have been nice if the football season had extended, just a couple more weeks.
Right? Oh my gosh. It's yeah, that that is a that's one of those interesting, we don't want to become Buffalo, you know, so we're I draw those comparisons, right? There's so much, there's so much that could be compared, Ralph Wilson and other things, but gosh, it's going to be an interesting couple of years as this Lions team comes into their own, and you know, their talent seems to be right there. It's going to be real dramatic, I think would be the word coming up. Um,
Yes, and it's just fun that everybody kind of gets swept up in the excitement of it. It's just sort of this communal passion. And if you don't care about football, you know people who care, so you care because they care and you're rooting for your friends. And it really is fun.
it is fun. Hey, this is off the. I just want to get us rolling here because you've been really generous with your time, and we're going over a little bit, but we could talk about a lot of things. This is really fun because I've got a lot of for thank you, no thank you. I've got musicians and bands here. Music is my thing, and what if I asked you the last live show or the last great live concert you went to? Can you think? Can you share that with us?
Oh, geez. This is like trying to think of a joke when you want one.
Right. And
Um,
I'm putting you on the spot, but or I'll give you a parachute, or maybe a go-to favorite band or artist, you know, that should you be into vinyl would be on your turntable.
um, Springsteen does not get old and tired with me. And he is a great live show. And it's almost
Oh
a
yeah.
cliche.
Yep.
But, the first time I saw him, it was at the Silverdome. And it was just, it was amazing. I mean, there's 70,000 people or however many people were packed in there. And every time he raised his fist and shook it, 70,000 people went, ah!
Oh yeah.
And I just thought, this is amazing. Um,
Would you consider yourself a Bruce Maven? Like when the next album comes out, are you getting it or downloading it, or are you more of I love seeing him live because it's such an incredible show and event?
uh, I don't buy a lot of music these days. I've got
Yeah.
Sirius XM and I button punch all over there.
Yep.
I'm on the reggae channel, the Springsteen channel, the Sinatra channel. It's just huge fun.
Yep.
Um, but I mostly listen to music in the car. Jeez, I don't know, that sounds kind of pathetic or
I don't
like
think
I'm
so.
being untrue
I
to my
think many people are
roots.
like that, you know? I think yeah, I think you're like most. I think people are listening to music. I think they're listening to podcasts. I think they're listening to sports talk radio or talk radio. So no, I think you're in the I think that's normal.
I can tell you, I'm probably the last person in Michigan to have seen Bob Seger live.
Ah,
Not that I saw his last concert. It's just that, I mean, obviously I was aware of Bob Seger. I love Bob Seger, but you move to Michigan and every third person you meet saw him in a club for $2 or he played their high school homecoming.
of course. Yeah.
Everybody had seen Bob Seger. I finally caught him, I don't know, 5 years or so ago, maybe a little more.
Yeah.
I mean, he was so, this was the older Bob Seger. He was terrific. He was just
Yes.
great. And I knew I liked Bob Seger, but somehow I had never seen him live for all the hundreds of times he's played around here. So I finally caught up.
Well, you did yourself a favor, and we could go hours talking about him cuz God, we used to wear out the grooves of Live Bullet, you know, that album from start to finish, you know, it was so good. And people just people, I think people like they do Springsteen and others, they tend to diminish the artist. But my God, what a writer, what a soul singer, what a band leader, just an incredible person. And I think people just kind of remember Like a Rock or whatever, Hollywood Nights or Night Moves, and oh my gosh, hit after hit after hit. But his live shows were a revelation. I had Jay Giles Band on this list too, Neal, that I wanted to talk about too, which was just incredible band to see and underrated. But that's for another day. That's for a discussion over a Louis Pizza.
That sounds good.
Awesome. Well, so I think we've got a wrap because we've gone over a little bit. This has been terrific,
Okay.
and thank you. And as I say, and now for something completely different, a genuine thank you to you, Neal, for coming on. I want to ask my handful of listeners to please subscribe to the Detroit Free Press to read Neal's columns and the great work of local journalists who do actual reporting on the issues that matter to you and us as a collective society and as neighbors. So go there, freep.com, and read Neal's columns and do it now. Do it today. It's a very and when you subscribe, that's a really, really low cost investment on some really, really good writing and reporting. So do it. Relative to this show, and I Thank You show, is a production of Arthur Street Weirdos, and it's written by yours truly. The theme music is by Royalty Free. Brand creative is by Brad Lutz. If you're consuming this fine product via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the like, please rate and review it. 5 stars is nice, and frankly, it's the least you can do. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, please subscribe. That really helps people find it. And give us a thumbs up. All of this will help people indeed find us so that they can waste their valuable time. Comments can be shared at andithankyou@gmail.com. So go there and send me a note. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And Neal Rubin, I thank you. And I look forward to us getting together, and I look forward to reading your next piece, whether that's on Sheets or anything else.
Well, thank you. Huge pleasure to be here, and I look forward to Louis.
All right. Until then, take care, Neal.
Bye-bye.